welcome everyone to our CMMC Weekly Roundtable. Really excited today. We have Don and Alejandro joining us. They're going to be talking all about Microsoft licensing process, insights on what migration will look like for those of us in the CMMC ecosystem, whether you're implementers, assessors, consultants, or even defense contractors. Yeah, Microsoft GCC and GCC High is a very hot topic. We had 2 weeks ago, I believe, we had Justin Orcutt join us, give us a high-level overview about Microsoft offerings. But now let's get into the details. So welcome, Don and Alejandro. I'll let you all take it from here.
Derek, thank you so much. We're grateful for this. Alejandro, I don't know if you want to say hello, and then I'll jump in, or if...
No, thanks, Derek. We appreciate the opportunity. So, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, thank you. So, it's interesting, right? I mean, the CMMC world there's so many dynamic little things that are happening. We kind of think from an eventuality perspective, though, at some point, the consideration on whoever is running it, whether it's the assessor, the C3PS, somebody is potentially guiding and instructing the customer truly on what their options are. And at some point, delivering those options, moving those users into a GCC High environment. Alejandro has been 1234 MicroTechnologies, a 26-year-old Microsoft shop, has been active in AOSG for almost at this point, I think 4 years. Yeah, dozens and dozens of partners and dozens of customers, right? So there's a grand familiarity on the process here. We recognized, Alejandro and myself, some challenges inside the AOSG program itself. Nothing against our dear friends at Microsoft. Realistically, there's about 61, maybe 63 sources for GCC High in America. Only, as I think most of the audience realizes, only exclusively through authorized AOSG resellers. And so when we saw some of these challenges, we thought, gosh, maybe there's a way that we can show partners an easier path to getting what it is that they may need for their customers. So that's in fact what we did. We created a partner program for this. We highlight that through a series of different things that we think are extremely beneficial and valuable to our partners. One is we offer a secure partner portal. So there's a multi-factor authentication to get to that. Once you're there, you can have your company's admin determine who can see what and do what. But in particular, you can create quotes. From there, you can have an order submission process. We normally deliver licenses in 24 to 48 hours. And then it also gives the partner the understanding here. This is something where there's a kind of a challenge in AOSG. For MSP partners and our MSSP partners, there are no storage of that license information in Partner Center. So our secure partner portal will contain that information for you, which is incredibly valuable to our partners to be able to know who their customers are, what they've ordered, when their renewals are. These are important issues, especially since we offer a transactional margin, a discount to our partners, and so that there's some revenue components to this relationship as well. Secondarily to our partner portal, we offer what we call a license guidance service, and I think principally that'll be the main context of this conversation, so I'm not going to dive into that. But the third thing is that we offer what we call additional services. So when our partners, and when we put this program together, we've got partners that are huge with hundreds of employees, deep tech talent and bench. They can do all kinds of things, all the way down to a 1 or 2 man company who's just doing CMMC consulting for their customers and may need to have a partner they trust to help them with migrations or help them with specific project work. So we open that up. Those additional services, I can't stress this point enough, are fully at the discretion of the partner. We seek no communication with our partners' customers. We do not compete with our partners. If all we're looked upon as a source for GCC High licensing, we're grateful for the privilege to work with folks. We just offer the additional services because we do recognize in the marketplace there are those that need that kind of support and help. So that's just a very quick understanding here of our partner program. And I think as we kind of get through this conversation, we'll explore a little bit more with it.
Thanks, Don. So I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about, just to give you a quick little glimpse again. I know if you were on the meeting with Justin, you saw this slide, but I think it helps bring the whole conversation into context and should spar a bunch of questions. So I'm sure you've seen this slide. This is all over Microsoft's website, and they use it in most of their presentations. But when we talk about CMMC, it's very important to understand where you should put your environment and what type of licensing you should really look after. This chart is very valuable, but when we work with our customers, our partners, it really comes down to one question: whether you choose GCC or GCC High. As you can see from this chart, CMMC level 2, there's no chance to do this in commercial. You cannot do this in commercial Office 365. You have to be in GCC or GCC High. So the big real question is, which do you pick? And it comes down to one question, and that is really, do you have ITAR data? If your customer, your end user has ITAR data, you're in GCC High. There's no gray area here.
Right.
There's no like, oh, well, we could do it in GCC and we'll just set up the same policies. No. So you have to be in High if you deal with ITAR. That's usually the one question, the differential question that we bring up. So the big question, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time unless somebody has a particular question about it. We can certainly come back to it later. But I did want to bring up about some of the ways that you can get these licenses, as Don mentioned, through AOSG, Agreement of Online Services Government. Thank you, Microsoft, for yet another acronym that makes no sense. So commercial and GCC can be bought through the CSP program. Most MSPs are in the CSP program. All of the indirect resellers that CSPs buy from are authorized to sell GCC. You can also buy that through the AOSG program, and I'll go into the differences between those two programs in a moment. In GCC High, is it only available to AOSG partners? Or if you're a large enough organization where you have a direct enterprise agreement with Microsoft, you can add GCC High license to that. But we're finding that most government contractors, we're dealing with smaller businesses here, sub 500 users. The target then is through the AOSG program. And I wanted to list that Azure Government is only available in CSP through direct tier 1 partners, which is also like AOSG. It's a very small list of partners that qualify to do that. And through AOSG, you can do prepaid credits or just monthly consumption. Now, the difference between CSP and AOSG when it comes to GCC is really comes down to price. So through the AOSG program, GCC licenses, are less expensive in CSP than they are in AOSG. There's really only one scenario we found where a customer may want to buy GCC through the AOSG program. Well, actually, there's two reasons right now. One reason is you want price lock. You can do a 3-year agreement in AOSG, whereas CSP is only an annual agreement and pricing can change really at any time. Through the AOSG program, you can have a 3-year agreement and lock your price in. And there's some organizations that find that attractive and mandate that. So they'll pay the higher price through that program. GCC High, it's only through AOSG. It's only annual and it's only upfront. There's no monthly term. There's no monthly option. You can only buy GCC High from an annual perspective. So, and if there's questions, feel free to, I'll be happy to answer questions as I go along, but if there's any of that didn't make sense, you have more questions, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand. Jared will grab my attention. I want to give some examples of a common thought because your customer may not want to move everything into GCC High or GCC to become compliant. There's this concept of an enclave. And I wanted to touch base on a way that we recommend doing that and what that really means. And one way to determine if you want to do an enclave or not is to really look at the customer's business and decide how much of their data and their business is related to CUI and would fall under the governance of CMMC. So for example, if you're dealing with a government contractor and 90% of their business is dealing with CUI, then it makes the most sense to move their entire environment into GCC High. But if they're only maybe 10% government contracts and maybe they have 90% of their business is commercial, that's where this idea of an enclave comes in to separate that CUI data into its own little private environment. And Microsoft does this really well with their Windows 365 solution. What's important to note is whether you decide to do GCC or GCC High, when it comes to Windows 365, the end workstations, the end cloud PCs are only in GCC High. So even if the customer's tenants in GCC, the configuration, the environment, the licensing are all on the GCC side, but the back end of Windows 365 is only GCC High. And so that's important to note just from when you're looking at your policies and your everything, that everything about Windows 365 is GCC High. So it does meet those more strict policies that we showed on that slide earlier. We chose Windows 365 over, I know Azure Virtual Desktop is very common when it comes to building enclaves and building those isolated environments. But we like Windows 3 a couple of reasons. One, fixed pricing, as I illustrated here. It's a fixed cost per license versus a consumption model, as is with everything inside of Azure. You're paying consumption based on usage, which can fluctuate. With Windows 365, it's a fixed price. Now, you do have a minimum requirement of not only having the Windows 365 license, but you need Microsoft 365 E3 at a minimum to use Windows 365, which if you're going CMMC, you're probably starting there anyway, as a license. That's kind of it for the nuts and bolts that I had. I'm really interested to hear who has questions about any of these processes. I'm happy to talk about some of the migration processes of what it would look like to move into the environment from wherever the customer's environment is now.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So commercial had like 100% of the features and functions, and then GCC had less, let's say 80%, and GCC had 70%. How are they doing these days, getting that GCC and GCC High closer to all the same features and functions that commercial has?
So there's a roadmap, and I don't have that link readily available. We can find, there's a GCC and GCC High roadmap that will show you the features and products that are available on each platform. Microsoft likes to say it's 6 to 12 months behind commercial. So if a feature is released in commercial, that feature will end up in GCC or GCC High 6 months to a year later. However, there are some features that will never show up in GCC High, depending on what those features are. So for example, Microsoft Bookings is a common one that we get. Microsoft Bookings is in commercial and in GCC. It is not in GCC High. It'll never be in GCC High, because in order for Bookings to work, it has to be able to read the tenant using anonymous access. When you click a Bookings link, you're looking at data in the destination tenant anonymously, which is a no-no in CMMC and GCCI. You can't have anonymous sharing of any kind. So that app will never be available. Plus, any of the apps that are available in GCC High have to have gone through the FedRAMP process. So you don't see a lot of Teams app or third-party functionality like you do in the commercial tenants, because those apps and those vendors haven't passed FedRAMP. And so if you look at the Azure Marketplace in GCC High, you look at Teams, and you look at the apps that are available, they're vastly different because of that restriction. So some of it isn't because it's Microsoft development issues, it's because it doesn't meet FedRAMP policy or the security policies of that environment. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Great question. Get that often.
So
Go
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so one of the things that's also available to all of our partners, and therefore the people at our partners, is the ability to set in motion what we call this license guidance kind of approach. So when people are doing quotes, or when they're looking at, assessor or auditor or ideas to create policies that create configurations of licensing, and there may or may not be any confusion. If there's no confusion, create the quote. If there's some confusion or you want to ask some questions, that's exactly what we perform for in the portal. People can click, and we get a 15-minute meeting set up. Alejandro and I jump on the call with the partner, walk through, listen, learn what's kind of going on, and make recommendations based on that. Again, always with the idea of meeting the requirements of the auditor or assessor, CPO, whoever it is that's driving that, and then looking at that from a kind of a cost containment, a cost management, deliverable. Is everything G5 across the board? Well, I don't know, maybe it is. But perhaps there could be G3s with different alternatives added to it, Defender Plan 1 and 2, or it might be F3s, depending on what the use of that end user is. So we're always trying to drive forth to make sure we're meeting the requirements, and then taking into account your customer's cost, guys. We're really trying to make sure that we, hold some of these things into an appeal, for your customer.
Is there a chart, or can you show something like that on how you look at the whole G5, 3, and other different offerings to try to help reduce the cost to customers? So let's say somebody has 100 people, and you're going to try and figure out, okay, how many G5s do you really need? Can you do others?
Right.
It's kind of the process there. And do you have a chart that you have that you could show that shows the different types?
You mean a chart like this?
Yeah.
So this can be found on the Microsoft website. We can make it available to you as well. We have one of these for GCC High, GCC, and commercial, but this does give you the individual feature list for. Now, I do want to take a minute to note. You'll notice in this chart it says G3, G5. We've used the term E3, E5. The commercial sizes use the enterprise SKUs. The enterprise SKUs are in alignment with the government SKUs. Depending on which website you look at, you'll see it'll say E3-GCC, or it'll say G3 or G5. If I slip up, they're the same product. So just FYI on that. Excuse me. So this chart does show you the feature parity between G3 and G5. And then as Don mentioned, a common one is F3. Typically, most of the customers that we run across and a lot of the partners we work with will either do a G3 and a G5. We tend to recommend one or the other based on whatever the use case is. So if you have any Power BI, if you want to do any type of automation around labeling, if you're going to take full advantage of Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Office 365, those technologies have the most feature set in G5. And so we typically would push to that if you're going to go all in on Microsoft and not have any other security products at play here. G5 is certainly the way to go, but it's not always the best option, again, depending on that customer example. If they're not going to do any Power BI, they're a smaller customer, then you can achieve the similar features with G3 and then adding your Defender licenses separately. Now, if you have customers that have employees that are, maybe they're only working at a government site, they're working on GFE equipment, or they're only on a mobile device, this is where the F3 SKU comes into play very nicely, where it's giving them all the cloud services, all the security, so you still get Active Directory Premium and Intune and labeling, Purview, all of those features are still there in F3. Smaller data footprint, so there's a smaller mailbox, smaller OneDrive, no desktop apps because it's not designed for a user with a PC. And that comes in at a significantly less price point than the G3 and G5s and GCC High. And when I mean significant, G5 MSRP is $1,120, G3 is $733, F3 is $151. So when you have those mobile users, and this is an annual price.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can you say that again?
Sure. G5 MSRP is $1,120 annual. All GCC is annual. G3 is $733 MSRP. And then the F3 is $151 MSRP.
So to answer your question, Mark, it gives us the privilege to learn and listen from our partners and then help derive, what would be a pleasing quote to the customer. Yeah.
One of my most favorite topics is talking about licensing. I know I'm one of the few crazy people on this planet that loves Microsoft licensing, but I really do find it, I keep up with it all and I find it very fascinating. So I love to talk to our partners about what's the right license, what's the right combination. When you're thinking about these products too, and you're looking at a customer who's already in commercial and you're trying to find product parity, please note that none of the business SKUs that you see in the commercial Office 365, like Business Standard, Business Basic, Business Premium, they don't exist in the GCC or GCC High environment. It is only the enterprise SKUs that are available. And I would also shy away from the Office 365. So when we talk about G3, G5, we're talking about these SKUs that are here on the left, the Microsoft 365 SKUs. The Office 365 SKUs do not have the security features needed for compliance. So you would have to add on, EMS, which is next to that, or the G5 security add-on. By the time you do that and you start mix and matching all of these products, you're better off just going with the bundled SKU at that point. Plus, it makes your license management a whole lot easier to have a single SKU versus, or maybe another Defender SKU versus having Office, EMS, Defender. It just gets to be a little much to manage. And you make your advisor and auditor just go crazy. Like, what's your standard for licensing? What's your standard process?
Why are there no dots under the G5 security one?
Well, because if you look here, this is just this first page. This is 8 pages long. So the Office apps aren't under G5 security. This is an add-on designed to be added on to the G3 SKU. So if we scroll down here to where we get into the security products, here's information protection, here's threat protection. So Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365. they're in that G5 security add-on. So that's where they come into play. So here under identity access, you'll see there's a lot more features.
Yeah, if you throw the link to this in the chat, it'd be awesome.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So Alejandro, can you talk about the migration, what that looks like, and especially, let's say, for defense contractors where they may get that initial sticker shock when they see GCC High at annual cost versus GCC, but talk about if they're planning for future state, like maybe they don't have ITAR or export control data today, so they elect for GCC, but maybe a couple of years from now they may have it. What is that migration going to look like?
So yeah, this is a very common question, and there's a lot of misconception thinking, oh, I just need to buy the license and add it to my current environment, and now I'm magically in GCC High. That is not the case. So commercial, GCC, and GCC High are three separate instances inside of Microsoft. While commercial and GCC are in the same physical data centers, they are different environments. So if you're in commercial, to move to GCC is a migration. And the same with High. So if you're in GCC and want to go to GCC High, that is a full data migration because it is a different data center in GCC High. There's no way to just flip a switch and add a license and move you from one environment to the other. Now, the good news is that you're moving Microsoft to Microsoft. So all of your data, for the most part, does migrate very seamlessly. And there's several ways you can do it. There's obviously the manual process, which we don't recommend. But most of our customers and our partners, and as you can imagine with GCC High, because of the limitations around FedRAMP and third-party tools accessing the environment, there are a few migration tools to allow a seamless process, but we recommend BitTitan. BitTitan is FedRAMPed when it comes to connecting to GCC High, and so they make very great migration tools to move not only mail, which is the most common, but OneDrive files, Teams channels, SharePoint sites, all Planner if you're moving to GCC, which isn't in GCC High yet, it's coming. All of the different cloud technologies inside of the environment can be moved very seamlessly with BitTitan, and that's our recommend to do that move. There's a whole process about staging and how you sync what and when, and we certainly would be happy to engage you and discuss it and help you with how that process actually works. But the only thing that doesn't migrate are guest accounts. So any sharing that you've already done, that the customer's already done, where you shared externally, all of those accounts and those permissions do not migrate. So your internal permissions do. So your internal groups, your internal SharePoint permissions, Teams memberships, all of that migrates. But any external sharing does not, for obvious reasons. From a security perspective, you wouldn't want that to be, come over automatically. And then there isn't currently a way for Teams one-to-one or group chats. So channels and channel chatting does migrate, but your individual teams, your individual group chats, one-to-one chats, none of that migrates over. So there isn't currently a way to migrate that data. You can export that data using eDiscovery, but you can't migrate it and then inject it into your new tenant. That's not possible. I don't know that it ever will be. It also is important to note when we talked about licensing and migration, if your customer is currently using Microsoft Copilot, there is Copilot for GCC. It is currently only available through the AOSG program, but come, I'm told, March, it will be available in the CSP program that you'll be able to get Microsoft 365 Copilot. It is not available yet in GCC High, but is coming there, I'm told, late summer. So that's currently the thought. It is important to note that the Copilot experience, though, in GCC and GCC High is a little different than it is in the commercial experience. So in commercial, Copilot can access the web if you allow it and pull in external data when you're doing your searches. In GCC and GCC High, that is not the case. It has no access to the public internet and can only work with the data that's inside your tenant. So when it's querying information or looking up data, it can only pull data from in your tenant. It will not pull any external data. It was the only way that Microsoft could get it through the FedRAMP process. So if your customer is querying Copilot with Microsoft 365 in a Word document asking for the latest Eagle scores, you're not going to get them.
Does Copilot then take the data and use it for analytics and pull it back into their own?
No, it only stays in your tenant. None of the data that it's using is shared outside of your tenant in any way.
Okay.
Yep.
Question. So, like you were mentioning, we do a lot of business in the commercial sector or the private sector and very little in the FedServ DoD space. How do we manage? So if we are already on a Microsoft 365, do we then need to migrate our existing emails into GCC, GCC High, or have a completely different account set up in that environment?
So if you're going to do what I showed earlier about an enclave and you're just going to have a subset of users because it's not your entire business, you would need a separate domain name because you can't have the same domain in commercial and in GCC or GCC High. So if you're going to have both, you do need another domain name. And a lot of customers will take their domain and do a US for their government tenant. But if the bulk of your business is going to be government and you're going to be under the scrutiny of CMMC, then it would be a migration. You can move your current domain. So your current aliases, your emails, all of your email addresses will move over. You can move them over as part of that process. But if you're going to have both, it does need to be a separate domain name for your GCC or GCC High tenant.
And do you need to have a minimum number of accounts when you go with GCC or GCC High?
So Microsoft will say in order to have an agreement, you need a minimum of 5 licenses, but you don't need 5 of the same license. So you can buy, and we have some customers that are startups where they're just either testing the environment or they're a one-person show. They're buying 1 license. So you do need 5 licenses to get started in the program. But what we do is there's some $0 licenses to fill in the gap. So you're not really to start the agreement. You can have any 5 licenses. Once you have your agreement for the next year, you can buy in any quantity you need. So you can start out with 5, and then if you need 1 more, you just buy 1 more. So there's no minimum requirement at any time when you're placing the order.
So it's kind of just one example of the expertise, right? That we try to help our partners understand what might make the most sense to help your customer. Yeah, this is our true goal.
Great question.
So Alejandro, you mentioned about Don, I think you mentioned earlier about the process typically takes 1 to 2 days for the licenses.
So yeah, the purchase process, and then somebody had their hand raised. We'll have to get to that then. But yeah, so the process for the first step in any of this is getting validated. And I think Justin did touch on this. So if you saw Justin's, he mentioned it. And I do have the link for that handy. The first thing you need to do, whether you're a customer or you're a partner, is you have to get validated. And so that is the first step in the process. Once you've gotten validated by Microsoft, which we normally say takes 24 to 48 hours, I've literally seen it take 2 hours. There's such a hot need for licensing right now. Microsoft has been Johnny on the spot with validations. So as long as you're not on somebody's blacklist or have international ties, you're going to be validated. Once you have that validation, we can set up your agreement. Again, that takes 24 to 48 hours. Once the agreement's established, your licenses are provisioned instantaneously. And then subsequent orders, it is 24 hours. Now, that's the program today. Come April, we're told, again, this is what we're told, we'll see. Come April, that process should get a little faster because they're changing the back-end ordering system for repeat orders. So the initial order is still 24 to 48 hours, but your subsequent license orders in that year should only take a few hours to place. So that's coming. And somebody had it raise their hand. I think
it was Israel. Did you have a
Israel.
question? I think that was.
Yes, Alejandro. Yeah, just going back to touch on the Copilot real quick. With the GCC version of Copilot and the Office 365, are you able to use agents on SharePoint with that? And also, do you guys offer the Copilot Studio on that to develop agents?
Yes, you can use agents in the GCC environment and in theory, the GCC High environment. Again, know that the agents only live inside of your tenant.
Right, based upon the information on your tenant. Got
exactly.
it. Okay, thank you.
And Copilot Studio is available now in both. So you can use the Copilot Studio and create agents inside of GCC High. That
Sweet.
license has been released. I think that was released last fall. So that is available. And that's a tenant license. So Copilot Studio is not per user, unlike most of the other products in GCC High. Copilot Studio is listed per tenant. So it's just a single license you need for the Copilot Studio.
Sweet. All right. Thanks for that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of buzz around Copilot right now. And as you can imagine, the security concerns are why it's been delayed in getting into the GCC and the GCC High environment. It is also important to know if you're going to get Copilot before it's released in the CSP program, your base license has to come from the same environment. So if you're buying Copilot through the AOSG program, the base license of E3 has to also come from that same program. You can't mix licensing programs and have the features work together. So that's important because as you can see, there's multiple ways to buy licensing. So if you're buying through AOSG, then the licenses for Copilot and the subsequent licenses are going to be applied against also have to be purchased in that manner.
And that brings up an interesting point too, right? So if somebody orders licensing in February, right? So they initiate their enrollment February of 2025. What was existing on that price list in February 2025 is what the customer through the partner has the ability to add, right? So if something new comes in midway through 2025, a new feature like Copilot, whatever it might be, if it was not on that original agreement, what happens to the customer and the partner?
So normally Microsoft will tell you have to wait till your anniversary date, but what we would do is just create a new agreement. The pricing for your licenses are based on the time that you order. So if you order today, your licenses would be based on the February 2025 price list. And those would be the prices and the SKUs that are available to you for the length of the agreement. If a new product comes out on the price list that wasn't available previously, in order to order off of that, you would create a new agreement. And then that would be the anniversary date for that agreement. And then you could just let that expire because when your main agreement renews, you would just add those SKUs at that time to the main agreement.
What I was leading to with that question is we know a lot of the tips and tricks here.
Right.
Okay? So the intention here is to take our learned experiences and failures and successes and pass those on to our partners for the benefit, again, can't state it enough, for the benefit of your customers.
I've been managing the Microsoft licensing programs in their entirety for my entire career. I've taken a point to really try to stay ahead of everything that they do. And thankfully it's gotten better with the information sharing. It's been quite, when we first got into the AOSG program, there was very limited support and very limited information about it. They were like, oh, here, go ahead and order. We've taken a lot of time to work with Microsoft and learn these programs. And as Don said, it's our goal to help share a lot of this information to take the mystery out of how in the world do you get any of these products. Because it is important to note that the AOSP program, while it does have restrictions to it about who can get in, currently Microsoft has closed that program. And so there are not going to be new AOSG partners anytime soon. We don't know when they will open the program up again to other partners, but they have restricted it to the current list of 60 plus partners that are out there. So if you're not authorized to sell it yet, you won't be. So this is why we've decided to create this program and offer these services.
And at the same time, not compete with our partners, right?
Yep.
If all we're going to be, guys, is a source for your licensing, fantastic. If there's other things that you need from us, again, can't stress it enough, it's at the partner's discretion. You tell us what you'd like us to do, and that's what we'll do.
I'm not sure if we got to this question yet, but Craig Wood had asked, does Microsoft Azure Purview include label recognition for FCI, CUI, and CDI to help manage data governance?
It does. The best recommendation is to make sure that you have Plan 2, which is either in the compliance add-on or, of course, in G5. So, yes, you're going to want Plan 2. And 1 is a little limited when it comes to that. You can do it, but there's a lot of manual processes. If you're going to do auto labeling, which if you're going to do CUI labeling and whatnot, for example, you have a SharePoint library, a team site, and you want to label any data automatically in those sites, you need Plan 2 to do auto labeling of any kind. That makes sense?
What about the administration, the differences between going from Microsoft Commercial to, let's say, GCC High? Is there additional administration or complexities?
So it's only complex because you're setting up policies around CMMC, but as far as how the portals go and how you administer, it's essentially the same. So there is a different portal for GCC High. So the admin address is different. It's a .us extension instead of a .com. But the interface and the portals and the tools, Intune, Azure, they all have parity across the platforms. So if you're used to managing commercial Office 365, it's the same process, it's the same look and feel managing GCC or GCC High. The only difference is the address you log into is different for GCC High. And the same with the Azure portal, it's .us instead of .com. Now there is some, if you're a big PowerShell fan, there are some differences in how the Microsoft Graph works in GCC High. Again, it's just, excuse me, just from a security perspective, most of it is around connectivity. So your scripts around when you connect to a module, you just have to specify that you're connecting to the GCC High environment. All of that documentation is on the Microsoft website about how any of the PowerShell modules that you use all have an option to connect to. It'll either say the US government or sovereign cloud, depending on how long that script's been around, it'll have a different name. Most of the scripts have been updated to use the option of US government. But SharePoint Teams administration, all of that's the same. One thing to note though, and thanks Derek for bringing this up, Mark, you touched on this about feature parity. One of the things that does not exist in GCC High is the Teams voice. So we've seen customers that have taken advantage of the Teams phone system. It's available in GCC High, but the calling plans, the phone number, audio conferencing phone numbers, and those calling plans all have to be from a third party. Microsoft does not provide the calling plan infrastructure like it does in commercial or in GCC. In GCC High, you have to use a third-party vendor. And currently in the US, there's only two that I know of, and that would be Call Tower and AT&T, which we're partnered with both. They would be the ones providing the calling plan and the services. So the technology exists from a licensing perspective, but it's a different experience in how you administer it because the calling plan has to come from a third party. That's one of the big difference. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So you mentioned G5, G3, F3, the annual licensing cost. Is that the same for GCC and GCC High?
No, the GCC licenses are more in parity with commercial. E3, for example, is $467, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so the commercial GCC is more aligned price-wise with commercial. GCC High is typically anywhere from 30 to 40% higher than GCC across the board.
And is that just for the licenses, or is that potentially for other things like data usage or network usage, Azure-related items?
So in Azure Government, there is some things that have a premium price over commercial. So in GCC, it's still commercial Azure. They're in the same environment. They have price parity. In GCC High, because they're separate physical data centers, the pricing will be slightly higher. It just depends on the Azure service that you're using. And you can find all of that on the Azure price list. So if you go to the Microsoft.com or Azure.Microsoft.com, you'll see the pricing list. I don't know if you've ever used that before. You get to pick the data center region that you're in. And if you scroll the whole way to the bottom past all the international regions, at the bottom, you'll see the US sovereign cloud. And you'll be able to pick, there's only three. So it's Texas, Arizona, and Virginia are the only data centers for GCC High. You'll see that on the Azure price list, and then you can get MSRP pricing for those Azure services.
I get questions about sovereignty from clients. So let's say there is an international company, they have a US-based entity, and they get approved for GCC High. Could their foreign employees access that GCC High tenant, or any restrictions on that?
So there aren't technical restrictions unless you implement them. So that would be part of your policy if you wanted to restrict or allow. Some of that depends too on how strict your assessor decides to get. And you know, it's a case by case basis with customers and how they want to configure that. But there's no technical limitation from Microsoft. The data only resides in the US. So where you're accessing it from, that's still under your control, how you control your tenant. but the data only resides in the data centers in the United States. The Microsoft support people that support those environments are all in the United States. There is no international workforce that supports Azure Government or GCC High or the, as you saw, the DoD data center. All of that is US based and only US based. But you and the owner of your tenant, if you want to allow outside, that is a policy you can implement, whether you allow it or restrict it. Because the Microsoft does recognize, and so does the government, that there is international travel. So you have to be able to get your email when you're abroad. So the functionality does exist, but just based on how you set up your conditional access policy. Another reason why to have the right license, because if you don't have Entra ID, the new word for it, you can't do conditional access policies. But there's no restriction. It is important to know that, as you said, the international company has to have a US-based location. They have to have a footprint in the United States. You can't just say, I have employees that work from home. That's not enough. There needs to be a footprint because the agreement has to be with that US entity. You cannot set up a GCCI agreement with a foreign entity. That's not an option.
Very insightful. Thank you. Does 1234 offer managed services?
We do. So whether it's through a partner or direct to a customer, depending on the relationship, we do offer a full set of traditional MSP managed services. We do have some implementation centered around CMMC. We do a lot of that through our partners, where the partner wants us to handle the migration, handle the implementation, help get the policies set up, get ready for the assessment, the compliance assessment. So we have a whole range of options when it comes to that.
That's what we dovetailed into the additional services, because when we designed the program, the spectrum of huge companies down to 1 or 2 men. So we created the idea of being able to take our 26 years of expertise and making it available. And again, always at the partner's discretion.
And usually there's a lot more license questions when I have these kind of meetings.
Anyone else have questions you want to ask? Now's the time. The floor is open.
You can always reach us anytime. Yeah, there's our 1234micro.com, right? Gets you right to us. There's all kinds of contact us forms, and there's ways to do that. And always happy to meet someone new.
So there's our emails. You'll find us both on LinkedIn. The QR code takes you to our partner program sign-up form. So if you're interested in our partner program, that QR code will take you to that site to sign up. So feel free to capture that.
Yeah, just
capture that video later.
a little kind of housekeeping note on our partner program. And again, we try to think about this as if we were in your shoes, the partner shoes. So our process is pretty simple. We want to take your NDA, right? There's language that your people have designed into your NDA, not ours. So let's start with yours. And then from there, it's our partner agreement, 3.5 pages. We're not looking to make this thing ridiculously redlined by your legal department. It's pretty clean. There's some basic protections in there for both parties. In particular, there's an emphasis based on the renewal, and I want everybody to try to realize that from the perspective of your customers. So, we get together, we start having a partner relationship, 25 licenses here, 50 there, but whatever it might become towards the end of the year, gentlemen, the factor here is that most of these customers, if not all of them, this time next year will renew. So this is an attractive kind of revenue piece for you as our partner. And we make every effort to do that, both in our practice, but as well in our documentation. So again, we can't emphasize this enough, that it's always at the partner's discretion as to how you involve us and to what degree. If we're simply being your source for GCC High licensing, thank you. We'll give you prompt and professional attention to get that executed. If it's something more than that, we just need to look at that on a case basis, in terms of migrations or potentially other services that might help you and help your customer. The simpleness of it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of win-win. So that sounds like a win-win situation.
Customer,
right? Absolutely. Now, CPN community, we are vendor neutral, but Alejandro, I would like to get your insights on what do you feel are some advantages that GCC and GCC High offers for CMMC compliance over other competing cloud solutions?
So there are certainly other ways to achieve compliance in other platforms. There's Amazon has a secure cloud. There's Prevail. There's a bunch of other platforms.
Google Workspace.
Regardless of my little Microsoft stamp, certainly as a company, we focus on the Microsoft platform. But the biggest difference that we find that we strongly recommend the Microsoft platform over others is because it's a complete solution. We have a lot of customers where they've used Prevail and they've used other platforms and whatnot to build a solution, whereas Microsoft prevents the complete solution. They're dotting, they're trying to address all of the things that you need to become compliant and to still operate your business. I mean, we all know that security is inconvenient, from MFA all the way down to everything else. Security creates inconvenience to you doing your business. And so by keeping everything in a single environment in the Microsoft platform, your email, your collaboration, your files, your security, your antivirus, right down to backup, all of those things are contained in a single environment, just making it a little more easier for you to go about your day instead of trying to hop between platforms. And especially from an IT administrative perspective, it's certainly harder to maintain security standards when you're dealing with more than one environment that has their own roadmaps and their own challenges. Trying to make all that work together and keep everything compliant and assess that every year, it's just a lot simpler using the Microsoft platform because they made it simpler. Two of the things I put in the chat, the first one that really addresses your question is, Microsoft's put a placemat together to show you how their services, their individual products are in alignment with CMMC level 2. And that's what that placemat is for, to let you pick the licenses, the services, whether you're using Azure, whether you're using services in Azure like Sentinel, whether you're on G3, G5, whatever. That placemat will show you all of the control families of CMMC level 2. You can also pick, they also have NIST 800, 171, 53. There's some other compliance protocols in that placemat as well, but it's specifically designed around CMMC. But that'll show you all the Microsoft technologies and where those align with the individual control families that you'll ultimately use in your SSP. You can actually use a lot of the content out of that to address not only your SSP, but we all should have a security matrix, a shared responsibility matrix rather, sorry. A lot of that content will help you to fill out those documents. So I strongly recommend you look at the placemat, whether for yourself or for your customers. And then I did include the link that Mark, you asked for the GCC High PDF that we showed the license comparison. That's in there as well.
Obviously, if you're a partner of ours, we're always available to talk to you, right? So,
right.
Yeah, even if you're not a signed partner, we're still going to do our best to help you and your customer. Yep.
But I think Microsoft, with their size, their focus on the federal government, most of the federal government is in. I mean, this is the one big screaming factor that I tell customers why we would recommend Microsoft over it. Most of the federal government operates inside of Microsoft 365. So if you're sharing with DoD customers, you're sharing with any of the departments inside of the government, most likely you're doing that in a Microsoft tenant. So it makes it a little easier for you to be able to access those resources or share with those agencies by you being in Microsoft yourself.
Makes sense.
Hey, one more question. In one of these charts, you talked about CSP versus AOSG, and maybe I missed it, but when somebody's making a decision, why would they pick one versus the other? I see the chart there, but let's just say you guys both do it. Is there a benefit to one versus the other, either monetarily or other different types of benefits?
So are you asking this question as a customer or as a partner?
Let's say a customer. Well, I am consulting with a DoD contractor, so
okay,
to help them.
Right. So the real difference is, well, one, GCC High is only available through ASG, so you don't have a choice. For right, GCC, the real difference is price and price guarantee. So in CSP, there's no price guarantee, but it is a lower price than the AOSG side, which can have a price guarantee. So we had a customer years ago that asked for 3-year price guarantee to quote them licensing and lock the pricing, guaranteed pricing for 3 years. The only way to do that is through the AOSG program, because you're setting up basically what's happening is you're creating an enterprise agreement. So this follows the same rules as a traditional enterprise agreement with Microsoft. So you can say, I want a 3-year price lock. You can say 1 year, you can say 2 years. You have the option of how many years you're agreeing to have licenses. So if you do a 3-year, you have to do it through AOSG. CSP, you're at the whim. Now, the one benefit of CSP is there is a monthly option. So unlike GCC High, where it's only annual, and even in GCC through the AOSG program, it's only annual. In CSP, there is a monthly option, but it is at a 20% premium. Monthly SKUs are 20% higher than annual SKUs. So that just depends on cash flow in the business and their size. You do have some flexibility in CSP to switch. So if you're in a monthly engagement, you can switch to annual instantaneously. If you're in annual, you can't go back to monthly until your anniversary date, but you can, if you're a startup, some companies want to do monthly just to get started, keep their costs down, and then switch to annual to save money later. So
okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
For GCC High licenses, does the price, does it get cheaper the more seats you have, or it's pretty standard?
There's no tiers inside of Microsoft. Yeah, so the price is the price. Yeah. So the only way you can get that price down is if you're doing a traditional enterprise agreement, and that is typically targeted to users like over 2,500 seats. So if you're spending millions of dollars with Microsoft, there's an opportunity to get some price savings, but you're bundling that in with like your on-premise servers, your on-premise, if you have a fleet of 10,000 workstations and you're buying Office and you're buying Windows, you bundle all that into your enterprise agreement. AOSG and GCC High is only for cloud services. So we get a lot of customers that are saying, hey, I'm going to be in GCC High, but I also need Windows Server licenses too. You're not buying Windows Server licenses through AOSG. It's only for the cloud technologies. You still have to buy those through the commercial channels or through the CSP program. Yep.
Awesome. I think this has been a fantastic presentation. Thank you for sharing valuable insights.
Absolutely.
Have a couple more minutes left. Any last words you want to leave the audience with?
Just that we're here to help you in any way, Microsoft. That's our focus. And so if you have challenges with, quoting licensing or license options like we talked about, how you would go about a migration, even if you're not looking for us to help you with the migration, we're certainly here to help you with information about some of the scenarios and what it could look like. So think of us for anything Microsoft. That's why we're here.
Awesome.
Yeah, appreciate it, Derek, for opening the door for us. We're grateful for it.
Thank you.
Anybody who's on this call and is interested to talk more, we're pretty easy to find.
Are you struggling with CMMC compliance? Feeling stuck and uncertain about your career path in cybersecurity? Imagine having a clear path, expert mentorship, and a supportive community to help you master CMMC and thrive in your career. If you're just looking for another certification, this may not be for you. But if you're committed to making an impact, keep watching. Welcome to CPN, a mission-driven community empowering cybersecurity professionals with the resources, real-world experience, and mentorship needed for success in the CMMC ecosystem. At CPN, we focus on quality training, meaningful mentorship, and a strong network that prepares you to support the defense industrial base with confidence. Join us today and start advancing in your career with the guidance you deserve. Gain insights from experts, build hands-on experience, and connect with a network that supports your growth. With CPN, you're never alone in your CMMC journey.